Khair, moving on to the second issue. What does it actually mean to catch a salah within its time? What needs to happen in order for you to catch the salah within its time? So we have two opinions on this issue. The Hanafis and the Hanbalis, they said that as long as you catch the takbiratul ihram in the time, in its valid time, then you have caught the salah. So as long as you catch takbiratul ihram before the sun sets, you have caught asr. As long as you catch the takbiratul ihram before the shadow hits its complete length, you have caught the dhuhr prayer. As long as you catch takbiratul ihram before the sun rises, you have caught the fajr prayer. Right? They said as long as you catch takbiratul ihram. That is the Hanafi and the Hanbali madhab. Opinion number two, the Maliki madhab and the Shafi'i madhab. Maliki madhab and the Shafi'i madhab. They said you have to catch one complete rak'ah, meaning the takbiratul ihram, the ruku' and the two sajdas. If you catch the two sajdas, then you have actually caught the whole rak'ah, and that is what it means to actually catch the salah. That is what it means to actually catch the salah. These are the opinions amongst the madhahib. When you look in terms of the tabi'een and some of the imams of hadith, they had a third opinion. They had a third opinion, which is as long as you catch the ruku', then you have caught the salah. As long as you have caught the ruku', then you have caught the salah. This is based upon the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that whoever catches the ruku', then he has caught the salah. Then he has caught the salah. Now, in this situation, what should you aim for? You should aim for the Maliki and Shafi'i madhab, meaning that try to catch the whole rak'ah. This is to be on the absolute safe side. Worst case scenario, catch the takbiratul ihram and you're fine. Catch the takbiratul ihram and you're fine. So this is like an absolute case of necessity. You want to try to leave as much time as you need to pray one rak'ah, and that is the absolute minimum that needs to be done before the salah timing is over. Before the salah timing is over. Now, something that needs to be mentioned when you're not sure of the salah times itself. So for example, we're all out, on a barbecue one day, and it's pretty cloudy, and we start looking around, and we start asking each other, hey, is the time for Maghrib kicked in? Has the time for Maghrib kicked in? Then you get this one person, he's like, yes, the time for Maghrib has kicked in. Why do you feel the time for Maghrib has kicked in? Oh, it's just a feeling, right? In this situation, you cannot make taqleed, you cannot blindly follow someone that does not have certain knowledge. You can only blindly follow someone that does have certain knowledge. So what I would say is that in times of doubt, always take the safer approach in delaying the salah. Always take the safer approach in delaying the salah as long as the salah itself doesn't run out. So rather than praying early and being doubtful, delay it and be on the safe side. Delay it and be on the safe side. Now, let us talk about prohibited and disliked times. Prohibited and disliked times. In the Sharia, there are 5 times where salah is prohibited or disliked. There are 5 times where the salah is prohibited or disliked. Those 5 timings are after the Fajr prayer until the sunrise. After the Fajr prayer until the sun has risen. Until the sun has risen. Number 2, during the sunrise itself, till about 15 or 20 minutes afterwards. Till about 15 or 20 minutes afterwards. Number 3, when the sun is at its absolute peak, meaning that there's a period of time about 15 to 20 minutes before Dhuhr time, where the sun is at its absolute peak, then that is a time that it is prohibited or disliked. Number 4, after the Asr prayer until the sun sets. After the Asr prayer until the sun sets. And then number 5, during the yellow period of the sunset. During the yellow period of the sunset. Meaning so that time just shortly before the Maghrib prayer. When you look at the different narrations that talk about times that are prohibited and times that are disliked, these are the 5 signs that you will find are disliked. These are the 5 signs that you will find are disliked. Let us summarize this discussion. You should know of 3 particular times. Know of 3 particular times. Number 1, while the sun is rising. Number 2, while the sun is at its highest point. And number 3, that short period of time just before Maghrib. These are, out of the 5 times, the 3 most important times where you should know that the salah is disliked and in fact prohibited. The salah is prohibited. What does it mean that the salah is prohibited during these times? Number 1 is that if you have to pray a fard prayer it is permissible to pray within these times, but it is disliked to do so. So that's the first thing that it means. If you have a fard prayer, it is permissible to pray during these times, but it is disliked. Number two is that if you have a nafil prayer that has no reason behind it, then it should be avoided completely. It should be avoided completely. So for example, someone is praying duha, someone is just praying a regular nafil prayer, then it should be avoided completely during these 3 times. During these 3 times. Number 3 is that if you have a reason to pray, then some of the scholars accepted it and some of the scholars disliked it. Some of the scholars accepted it, some of the scholars disliked it. What does it mean you have a reason to pray? So for example, you walk into the masjid and you have quite a bit of time left till Maghrib. Can you pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid or not? Or for example, you just made wudu and it's one of the disliked times. Can you pray that prayer of Tahiyyat al-Wudu, of entering into a state of wudu or not? Difference of opinion. Safer opinion is that don't get too close to the actual, how do I phrase this? I have it in my head, but I don't know how to phrase it on my tongue. So the reason of, let's go into this. Why are those 3 particular times prohibited, or the strongest prohibition? Because that is the time when the people that worship the sun, right? That when the sun is at its highest point, as the sun is setting in that yellow time period, and as the sun is rising. So to be different from the disbelievers and those that worship the sun, the Prophet ﷺ prohibited those prayers during that time. Now how about the other 2 times? Why are those times disliked? Those 2 other times are disliked. So the time after Asr prayer until the sun sets, and the time after you pray Fajr till the sun rises, because the Prophet ﷺ wanted to give people a break. This is hard to fathom, but there are some people that would love to pray Salah all day long, and they wouldn't fulfill the rights of their wives, they wouldn't fulfill their own daily necessities. So the Prophet ﷺ had to force them to give them a break. So he made those times prohibited so that they would spend time at home and spend time with their families and do other things as well. So that is why the scholars mention that those 2 times are prohibited. From after you pray the Fajr prayer till the sun rises, and after the Asr prayer till the sun sets, that you shouldn't pray nafil prayers. As for the other 3 times that we mentioned, then that is directly related to the sun, and we should not be like the people that worship the sun during that time. So now, we said in summary that if you have a reason to pray during those times, then it is permissible to do so. However, particularly closer to the Maghrib time, particularly very close to the zenith time, and particularly very close to the sunrise, it's probably better not to pray those prayers. Meaning that if you just wait a few minutes, then you can actually pray and there's no sin upon you, nor are you in a doubtful situation. So avoid those doubtful situations as much as you can. How about something like istikhara? Does istikhara fall under a general nafil prayer, or is it a salah of reasoning? It is a salah of reasoning. So for example, if you have a need to make istikhara and you want to make istikhara, it is permissible to do so during that time. Any questions on the disliked timings? Go ahead.
I just want to clarify. Let's say you prayed Fajr.
Yeah.
You missed the sunnah of Fajr because you prayed in Jama'ah. Can you pray about disliked time?
So according to the majority, they said no, you can't pray during the disliked time. However, when you look at the narrations of some of the Sahaba, they actually did so themselves. That they prayed in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't make inkar of them. So the sunnahs for Fajr, Allah knows best, it is permissible to pray right after the Fajr prayer if you miss it. Wallahu alam. Ibrahim?
If you do pray during those times, like your sunnah, will it be accepted? Or will it happen?
So you're praying sunnah prayers, or what are you praying exactly?
Like the sunnah.
So the sunnah prayers, they're a part of the actual salah itself, and you have a reason to do so. I would say as long as you're not extremely close to those deadlines, then you're fine. But don't get extremely close to those deadlines. Wallahu a'lam. Yeah.
This is about the catching the salah.
Yeah.
If you missed it, but you made it to the very end, like you're on the.
So give me an actual scenario.
So you're just like, so today coming in, you missed it, and then.
So missed what? I'm not understanding.
Catching the salah. You didn't catch it.
In the congregation or by yourself?
Congregation. So you, the imam was at the last rak'ah.
Yeah.
So is it better?
Okay, so this has nothing to do with the timing, right?
No.
So when we discuss congregational prayer, we'll discuss it then, inshallah. Yeah.
So in the earlier hadith, you mentioned that the person who sits in the masjid after Subh Fajr
Yes.
and pray sunnah after sunrise.
Not sunnah, he prays 2 rak'ahs.
Two rakahs
Yeah.
after sunrise, he'll be getting a reward of Hajj and Umrah.
Yes.
So in this hadith, it's like you have to wait for 20 minutes after sunrise for making the salah.
Yes.
So combining these two, should we pray the 2 rakahs after sunrise, after 20 minutes after sunrise? Or?
Yeah, so you should not pray at the sunrise itself, but 15 to 20 minutes after the sunrise. That is when the shuruq actually is. Wallahu alam. Any other questions on this? Go ahead.
For example, I couldn't get up on the proper time, the exact time, and I woke up in the daylight time
Yeah.
for Fajr.
Yes.
So do I just skip the Sunnah prayer and just straight pray the Fajr, or?
So if you're very close to the sunrise, yes, go ahead and pray your fard prayers only. However, if you have like 15 minutes or so, go ahead and pray your sunnahs and pray your fard itself. That's perfectly fine. Go ahead.
What's the difference between what was that one of the prohibited times was like right before Maghrib? What is that?
So the ones related to Maghrib is from after you pray Asr till the sun sets, and then you have where the sun is just about to set. So meaning it's not setting.
Are those two different times?
Well, we differentiated between those two because one, the Prophet ﷺ wants to give a break to the Ubbad, and because they're constantly worshipping, and the second one is because the prohibition of not being like the disbelievers. So that's why those two different prohibitions are there. Yeah.
Regarding Fajr Sunnah,
Yeah.
if I miss Fajr Sunnah before Fajr and then I prayed Fajr and then after that right away, should I start or I wait and then...
So this is what the brother was asking.
But my question is that which one is preferred? Like right after finishing the Fajr prayer, I should start the Sunnah, or I wait and for that 2 rakat Sunnah after sunrise and then I will pray.
So I would say if you have a particular madhab, follow what your madhab says. If you don't have a particular madhab, then it seems that it's perfectly fine to pray. It's not a problem, inshallah. Wallahu alam. Khair. Last discussion that I want to have with you for tonight. Actually, no, we have quite a bit of time. So this is not going to be last discussion. So the next discussion I want to have with you for today is the issue of what to do in winters and summer times in our situation of Calgary. So the first thing we want to understand is the general understanding that every salah needs to be prayed at its proper time. That is the general ruling of every salah. Now, when you go into Sahih Muslim, chapter number 100, it is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, where he says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam combined Dhuhr and Asr, and he combined Maghrib and Isha without traveling, without rain, and without fear. He was asked, why did he do this? He said, to make things easy for his ummah. To make things easy for his ummah. Imam at-Tirmidhi, in his introduction to Sunan at-Tirmidhi, he says, I have seen the scholars implement every single hadith except for 2 or 3 of them. One of the hadith that he mentions is this hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. So now with that having been said, what do we understand from this discussion? Is that up and until you have a very valid reason, then you should not be combining prayers. So we're not going to be talking about traveling, the issue of traveling. We're not discussing that today. We'll talk about Salatul Musafir perhaps at a later time. But what we are talking about right now, what if you have an extraneous circumstance? So for example, a surgeon is performing surgery, or you have an exam that will just take place like once in your lifetime, hopefully, like your CA exam or some other big exam, and they don't allow you to take a prayer break, nor do they allow you to pray in the room itself. Are you allowed to combine your Dhuhr with your Asr and your Maghrib with your Isha? If yes, what situation or scenario does it look like? So the answer to this question is yes. In extraneous circumstances, you are allowed to combine your prayers. They would be prayed in full. So you would pray Dhuhr full, Asr full, and you can be praying them either of the 2 times, either at Dhuhr time or at Asr time. And same thing with Maghrib and Isha. Maghrib would be prayed in full, Isha would be prayed in full in either of the 2 times. As a general rule of thumb, this should not be a reoccurring practice. If this is happening reoccurringly, then there's something that is definitely wrong over here. We get into scenario number 2 now. Scenario number 2 is that of the summertime. So we mentioned that the beginning of Salatul Isha is when what happens according to the majority. What happens? And then Salatul Isha begins. The redness of the sky disappears. Now, what if you live in a locality where the redness of the sky doesn't actually disappear? You'll actually see the redness of the sky there for a prolonged period of time, all the way until it is very close to Fajr time. How do you calculate what time Maghrib and Isha, how do you calculate what time Isha should be prayed at that time? This is more of a modern day phenomenon. In the books of fiqh, you generally will not find this discussion. You will generally not find this discussion. However, what hadith did they base this upon? We mentioned in our introduction to Kitab al-Salah last week that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they asked the Prophet ﷺ that at the end of time, when the day is so prolonged, it is, you know, the period of a year, what should we do? The Prophet ﷺ said, make taqdir, meaning approximate the timings of the Salah. So now the discussion arises, how do you approximate the timings of the Salah? How do you approximate the timings of the Salah? So now, in our situation like Calgary, you're given one of three scenarios. One of three scenarios. Scenario number one is that you look at the time difference between Maghrib and Isha in a place like Mecca and Medina, which is very close to the equator. And then you use that time difference and you establish that in your locality. So for example, if Maghrib is at 10 o'clock, add an hour and a half to it, Isha becomes at 11:30. So this is scenario number one, that you're doing taqdir based upon what is considered the normative state of living close to the equator. Because Mecca and Medina are very close to the equator, that is considered the normative state where the salahs were legislated. So this would be opinion number one. Opinion number two, they said that you take the closest city to you that has a normal time, meaning that it has a normal sunrise and sunset. So in a place like Calgary, perhaps the closest time we would find, and this is according to the ijtihad of Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick, I haven't reconfirmed this myself, but he said a place like Winnipeg, that has the closest thing to a normal prayer time. And what is their time average during the summertime? It's like an hour and 45 minutes to just under 2 hours. So for example, Maghrib is at 10 o'clock, then Isha time will begin around 11:45, because that is the closest city. Opinion number three, and this is given by the European Fiqh Council, they said that in a situation where you do not have a clear sunrise and sunset and beginning of timing of prayers, then you are allowed to combine the prayers up and until that clarity is made, up and until that clarity is made. Now this year in particular, I made an extra effort to look at, what was the situation in Calgary. And I noticed that from around June 2nd, all the way till about August 10th or so, we were in a situation where the red light for Maghrib was there for an extremely prolonged time. It was there for an extremely prolonged time, that even if you were to go out in the mountains, that's when you truly see the red light. You would see it even at like 11:40 or 11:45, around that time. So this shows us that we are in a situation where we don't have a normal state for Isha. Now we've stated already that it is not permissible to perpetually combine the prayers without reason. However, would this count as a valid reason for combining the prayers? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The European Fiqh Council found it as a valid reason. They said that if you have to pray Salatul Isha at 11:45, and then you have to wake up for Fajr, let's just say at like 3:45, there's very little time to actually get any sleep. And you add that into the realm of if you're fasting during that time, things become even more difficult. Things become even more difficult. Now you want to make the scenario even more complicated. How about if you want to pray Taraweeh? Does that mean you're going to pray Maghrib, pray Isha, right after that you pray Taraweeh? And the answer to that is no, you wouldn't pray Taraweeh. In that situation, you're exempted from praying Taraweeh because it is very difficult to do so. It is very difficult to do so. You wouldn't pray Taraweeh. What is my recommendation in this scenario? In this scenario is that we should try to stick to the rule of an hour and a half. Fixing the salahs at 11:15, I don't believe that to be permissible. I don't even know where that number comes from. That why did we decide at 11:15, as most of the calendars stated, that number is not appropriate or accurate because it doesn't abide by any of the opinions that we've stated. It doesn't abide by any of the opinions we've stated. Because nor are you going according to Mecca and Medina, nor are you going according to the closest city, nor are you taking the easy way out. If you're going to make things easy for the people, at least allow them to combine Maghrib and Isha. Why are you telling them to wait, an hour and 15 minutes? And realistically, is there a large difference between 11:15 and 11:30? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So now, with that having been said, the general rule of thumb in the summertime, particularly from those dates that I mentioned, from like June 2nd till about August 10th, then in that situation, use the rule of an hour and a half. That is the safest thing to do. In a situation where you feel you're extremely exhausted, you're not going to be able to stay up for Isha, and you might end up missing Fajr, then I do not see anything wrong in a one-off situation combining Maghrib with Isha. Based upon what? In the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah, Hassan radiallahu anhu, when he taught his children Salah, he taught them to combine Maghrib and Isha because he knew that they could not stay up. He knew that they could not stay up. And they were after the age of, where Salah had become upon them. So with that having been said, as a one-off, you are allowed to combine, but general rule of thumb, stick to the rule of an hour and a half. Do you understand the summer case scenario now? Fantastic. Let's move on to the issue of Dhuhr and Asr in the winter time. Dhuhr and Asr in the winter time. So now, can a prayer be prayed before its time, like Dhuhr or like Maghrib? And the answer is no. Dhuhr and Maghrib can never be prayed before the times. No, can Fajr actually, but Fajr is not a prayer that's combined. But from the prayers that are combined, Dhuhr and Maghrib, they can never be prayed before their times. So for example, if Dhuhr will start in the winter time, actually over here it's not much of an issue. Because the Dhuhr kicks in at like 11 something, at like 11:57 or something like that. So it's not so much of an issue. But in like other cities in Canada where Dhuhr kicks in at like 12:30 and your lunch break is from like 12 to like 12:30, can you pray Dhuhr before the time starts? No. And then what happens with Asr time, because you're not going to be getting an extra break at that time. So that is the scenario we're trying to paint where, Dhuhr, it starts at like 12:30 and Maghrib is at like 10 to 4 or like 4:15, like in Calgary time. So what do you do in that situation? Are you allowed to combine or not? So in this situation, again, the general rule of thumb is that prayers cannot be combined, and particularly not on a regular basis. So you have to make sure, come within agreement to your boss, come within agreement to your work, that, I just need 5 minutes, and try to stay in wudu as long as you possibly can, so that when the time kicks in, even in your cubicle, if that's where you have to pray, pray over there. That is what should be done, that each prayer should be prayed in its proper time. However, if there's an extraneous circumstance where you're traveling between meetings, so for example, you have to go from, let's just say, the northeast to southwest, it's going to be a long journey in the winter time, and you know that you're not going to be able to stop anywhere, and there's not going to be a place to pray, then in that one-off circumstance, it would be permissible to pray Dhuhr and Asr together at the time of Dhuhr, or Dhuhr and Asr at the time of Asr, and they would be prayed in full. They would be prayed in full. But again, as a general rule of thumb, only in extraneous circumstances. Only in extraneous circumstances. So I know a lot of times people who are working, it's difficult to get time off. In my personal experience, discuss these issues in advance with your boss, just so that there isn't a problem. Just so that there isn't a problem. That's the issue of the winter time. And was there anything else I wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so you say like Dhuhr cannot be prayed before its time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you pray Jummah before the time, especially.
Fantastic. So the time for Jummah, the scholars have actually differed in two groups. And even the second group has two opinions in it. Is it going to be the whole adhan? Okay, alhamdulillah, it's not. So the time for Jummah, there's two opinions. Opinion number one is the majority, the Maliki madhab, the Shanafi madhab, and the Hanafi madhab, that the time for Jummah starts when the time for Dhuhr starts. This is the opinion of the majority. The Hanbali madhab, they said no, the time for Jummah actually starts before the time for Dhuhr. What did they base this upon? They said that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we prayed Jummah with the Prophet ﷺ, and we sought shade in the walls before there was any shadow. Before there was any shadow. Meaning that this is before the time of Zawal. Before the time of Zawal. So the Hanbali madhab, it says that yes, you can pray before the time of Zawal. Now inside the Hanbali madhab itself, they differed. How much time before Zawal are you allowed to pray? Some scholars said that Jumu'ah is just like Eid, that as soon as the sun rises, you can pray Salatul Jumu'ah then. Other scholars, Shaykh ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah, he said that the morning is divided into 6 parts and you can only pray in the last 6th of the morning. Where did he get these 6 parts from? He said the hadith of Jumu'ah where the Prophet ﷺ says that whoever comes early, then it's as if he has sacrificed a camel, until he has sacrificed just an egg. And that was the last 6th of Jumu'ah according to him. So he said within this last 6th, then that is what you are allowed to pray in terms of the establishment of Jumu'ah. And that is the opinion we actually follow over here at the IIC, that we go according to the last 6th hour before the time for Dhuhr begins. That is why even in the summer times, we'll pray Jumu'ah at 12:30 in accordance to the last 6th of the hour. Why do we do that? I personally believe that the Hanbali opinion is correct, that you can pray Jumu'ah before the time for Dhuhr, but also due to the fact that when you have like 1,000 people that you need to accommodate, if we only keep one Jumu'ah at 1:30, or let's just say we have a second Jumu'ah at like 2:30, people can't take lunch breaks at 2:30, right? They can only take lunch breaks between usually 12 and 2. That's like the approximate time. So just to make things easy for the people, we'll have one Jumu'ah at 12:30 and another one at 1:30. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Any other questions on that? Khair. So I believe that the time for Isha has actually kicked in. What time do they give the Iqamah here? At 20? Okay, so we can do Q&A for 5 minutes and then we'll end over there inshallah. So now open Q&A for whatever you like inshallah. It doesn't have to be just about this. Go ahead.
So you part of it, but if you are at work, there's Zuhr and there's Asr and they will be Maghrib as well during the leisure time.
Yes.
If you want to go to mosque, you cannot go to mosque, it's going to take half an hour, 45 minutes.
Yes.
You cannot pray in the office because there is no place you can pray. Be it, your boss or your non-Muslim, they won't understand. What do you do?
So the first thing we need to make clear, you don't have to pray in the masjid. In a situation where you're working, you're exempted from praying in the masjid. Number 2, in your office, they have to religiously accommodate you for your prayers. If they discriminate against you because of your prayers, they would be, liable to a lawsuit in that situation. So as long as you make up the time that you miss, they have to let you pray. So for example, you take 15 minutes for Salah, then that means at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, you have to give in that extra 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes will not be exempted. So speak to your boss about that and they will allow you to pray. Where can you pray? People have this understanding that, we need to pray on a specific floor, on a specific room, on a specific carpet. That's not the rule. Any place that is clean, you're allowed to pray. So even if you have your own cubicle, you're allowed praying in your own cubicle. That won't be a problem. You don't have a cubicle, speak to your boss. Even if it's the janitor's room, pray in the janitor's room. Literally the only place where you shouldn't pray is in the bathroom. Other than that, every area is clean until it's proven to be dirty and you're allowed to pray. But the most important thing is communication. Communicate this with your boss and your boss has to accommodate to this. Wallahu alam. Yeah.
About the combining prayer for travel.
Yeah.
So can you just tell whether it's permitted during travel? The first question. The second question is actually, what is the ruling for Jummah during traveling? For example, I need the Jummah
Right.
travel maybe in the flight.
Yes.
So then I will pray Dhuhr. So it will be 2 rakah or 4 rakah.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to discuss the traveling prayer in detail, but I'll give you a summarized answer now. So the summarized answer is that as a traveler, as long as you're traveling more than 80 kilometers and you're making special preparations for that travel, then you are considered a traveler. With that having been said, you are allowed combining 4 prayers: Dhuhr and Asr, and Maghrib and Isha. Fajr is never combined. There's no combining with Fajr. Dhuhr and Asr can either be prayed at the time of Dhuhr or they can be prayed at the time of Asr. Maghrib and Isha can either be prayed at the time of Maghrib or they can be prayed at the time of Isha. Dhuhr becomes 2, Asr becomes 2. Maghrib stays as 3. Maghrib never changes and Isha becomes 2 rakahs. And yes, you are allowed to do so with those 2 conditions. Number 1, that you're traveling more than 80 kilometers, and number 2, that you have to make special preparations for that trip. As long as that is the case, then you are allowed to combine and shorten your prayers. Now, what is the preferred thing to do? If you're in a space for a prolonged period of time, so for example, you're going to California for work for let's just say a week, best case scenario is that you should try to pray in the masjid while you're there. If you're not able to pray in the masjid, then you will pray each prayer shortened, but in its proper time. So Dhuhr in its proper time, 2 rak'ahs. Asr in its proper time, 2 rak'ahs. Maghrib at its proper time, 3 rak'ahs. Isha at its proper time, 2 rak'ahs. Unless you're in an extremely busy situation, then you can combine and shorten with any circumstance. Now, next question in terms of Jum'ah while you're traveling. There is no Jum'ah for a traveler. In all of the narrations that we have of the Prophet ﷺ where he was traveling, never once did he establish Jum'ah while he was a traveler. And that is why some of the scholars have even said that if you intentionally stop your travel before praying Jum'ah, this would be considered an innovation. It would be considered a bid'ah, because the Prophet ﷺ never did so. So if a person is traveling, he has the concession to pray Dhuhr during that time, and he will pray it as 2 rak'ahs. Wallahu a'lam. Khisal was next, and then we'll go from there. Yeah.
So, catching a prayer, so we missed the prayer in congregation,
Yeah.
and the Imam was on the last rak'ah,
Yeah.
so we missed the ruku and everything. Is it better to join the congregation or wait for the Imam to finish and start your own congregation?
Fantastic. So now in this situation where you've entered the masjid, they're in the shahud in the last rak'ah, they have two scenarios over here. Scenario number one is where there's more than likely no second congregation. So if there's no second congregation, more than likely, then you join the congregation and you continue praying as your first rak'ah from where you start. In a situation where there more than likely is a second congregation, then it is better to delay it and join the second congregation. But that's only in the situation where you've missed the ruku' for the last rak'ah. If you can still catch the ruku', you should catch the ruku' with the jama'ah and pray with the congregation. Wallahu alam. Go ahead.
Okay. If I'm traveling,
Yeah.
my flight is at 11 o'clock.
11 a.m. or p.m.?
11 a.m.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on flight.
Yes.
And when I go into the flight, when I see my window, there is sunlight.
Yes.
I'm traveling to a different time zone, and all this
East or west?
Or east.
Okay.
So if I'm going towards east, the entire flight period is sunrise, so there is no sunset at all. So when I reach after 10 hours, so what should I make? Because that time when I reach there, it is maybe Maghrib time, or sometime maybe Asr is coming to an end. So how should I take this 10 hours duration?
So if you're going east, it wouldn't work like that, because if you're traveling east, you will have a sunrise and sunset, because you don't have the international date line. The international date line is when you're traveling west. So in this situation, you would have a sunrise and sunset, with the exception of when you're traveling extreme north in the summertime. So for example, if you're going to Calgary to like Frankfurt in the summertime, you'll leave here at 6:30 p.m. and you'll get into Frankfurt at like 11 a.m. and there's not going to be any sunset at that time, just because you're traveling north. In that situation, you approximate the timings. That's what you should do, because there's no correct answer over here. Because you can't skip a whole day of prayers. You can't skip a whole day of prayers because of that. So you just approximate the timings, and that's perfectly fine, inshallah. So just to give you a clear scenario, let's go back to the Frankfurt scenario. You leave here at 6:30, so you've already prayed Asr time, okay? So the old prayers you have to catch now, because you know you're arriving the next day at 11:30 a.m. So you have to catch Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr. Now there's not going to be any sunset, nor is there going to be any sunrise. So what you do know is that you're arriving at 11:30. So I would say within the last 2 hours or so, you can pray Fajr. And then I would delay my Maghrib and Isha probably by about 3 hours after takeoff. That will be about fair. Because 6:30 over here, Maghrib will be about 9:30. So 3 hours is fair. Yeah. Wallahu a'lam. There was brothers over here. Go ahead.
For congregation prayer,
Yeah.
you get more reward if there's more people in the prayer?
Yes. The greater the number of people, the greater the reward of the congregation.
What about Salah al-Eid? If you have like an attachment, you prefer to go to a certain mosque, you feel like I need.
So the general rule for Salatul Eid is that it should not be prayed in the masjid. It should be prayed in a public yard or a public gathering area. It should not be prayed in the masjid. So anytime there's the ability to pray in a public area, that is the preferred place. The bigger the congregation, the more the reward there is in that. Allahu A'lam. Safir?
Okay, so on the way and traveling from here to Cal and Vancouver.
Yes.
So we find a masjid and they get Jummah day. So if there is Jummah, so what to do? So we should pray Jummah or get them out?
So you are allowed to pray 2 rak'ahs with them, but your intention should be for Dhuhr, not for Jummah. And what I was stating is, to intentionally find a place to pray Jummah as a traveler is not good. But rather,
Because we find
yeah, so if you just happen to find a masjid and you're praying Dhuhr, and you're like, hey, they're praying Jummah, so you can listen to the khutbah, but when they are praying Jummah, your intention should be for Dhuhr. Your intention should be for Dhuhr. Make sense? Go ahead. Yeah.
You find the imam on the rukuk,
Yeah.
and then you come without making takbir al-ikram, and then you do rukuk with him.
Yeah.
So it's-
That is not correct. When we talk about Salatul Jama'ah, you will mention that when you're joining the congregation, there are two takbiras that have to be made. The takbiratul ihram and the takbirah of ruku'. The takbirah of ruku'. So there are two takbiras that have to be made. A lot of people make that mistake where they'll just go Allahu Akbar and you go straight into ruku'. That shouldn't be done. You should make takbiratul ihram and then make a second takbirah for going into takbirah of ruku'. Wallahu alam. Okay, last two questions inshallah and then we stop. Yeah.
Maybe you already covered this, but what's the time you can delay the maximum?
So yeah, we discussed the timing for dhuhr. We said that dhuhr starts as soon as it hits the highest point, all the way till the shadow is equal to one length. Then that is the time for dhuhr.
So like how do you calculate?
How do you calculate that? It would require to go out and stand in the sun. But that's why we have calendars and apps now. They calculate that for you. So I would say in your locality, it's very easy to use the calendars and apps. However, when you're outside of your locality, try to combine between using your app and between actually checking the length itself. And it's better to delay it a little bit rather than being doubtful and praying before the time actually starts. Wallahu alam. Last question?
When the takbir start for the Eid and when it ends?
So the takbirat for this Eid, they start from tomorrow at Fajr time and they end on the 13th day of Dhul Hijjah at Asr time. So 13th day of Dhul Hijjah would be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday would be the 13th. 13th Asr time on Sunday, inshallah.
Some people they say it's better to do it individually. Is that right?
So what is not allowed to do is I say everyone in my masjid follow after me. So I go Allahu Akbar and everyone starts joining me. That is not allowed. However, if I'm doing it by myself and Sajjad starts doing it and he starts doing it and we just naturally happen to go into it, that's perfectly fine. But to intentionally do it together, that should be avoided.
Or should they do that everywhere? Where someone with the mic and the other follow?
Yeah, that's just to encourage the people though, right? I've noticed a lot of times when we go to the Musalla for Eid, if you don't tell the people to make the takbirat, they'll be busy on their phone or talking to one another. And it's better that they do the takbirat rather than to be busy with other things. We'll conclude with that. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyan Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.